Hey there everyone, my name is Jason and welcome to Heroes for Hire Gaming, where we tell your story on your time. I'm hoping that these little forays into YouTube will provide intrepid GMs and board game collectors with more information about the games that they would like to play, and hopefully make your game sessions run that little bit smoother. Today, I'm talking Shadowrun. It is a very heavy system overall, and a lot of people have asked me the question of how can I incorporate the sub games, namely the Matrix and to a lesser degree Astral Space, into their session. So I figured I'd make a video to address these questions. And if you've played Shadowrun for any duration, you're all too familiar with this particular joke. This guy seems really hard to track down. I think I'm going to jack into the Matrix and look for clues. Ugh. Alright, well, we're going to go to the bar, get some pizza and beer, and we'll be back in, hour? Will an hour do? Now, personally, I love the Matrix. I love the feel of it, the general idea of it. Deckers can do so much in the game, considering almost everything has some degree of electronics in it. So it pains me when I hear that GMs have relegated Deckers to the sidelines or just down to NPC roles just due to the time that they take up at the table. So I've put together a list of ways that I use to try and compress the hacking side of the game to make it more accessible at the table. Hopefully, one or more of these ideas will work for your group as well. Number one, gloss over the incidental stuff. While I love the feel of the Matrix and the way the digital world is visualized, getting lost in the details for just simple legwork or hacking a small device, it adds a lot of bulk. These sorts of tests should be reduced to a simple roll or two. A few rules to remember are, if the device is turned off, tell the player that. Don't have them try 100 ways to hack a device, only for them to find out the guy just simply had it switched off and you just simply couldn't get at it. If they can physically see the device, no need to scan for it. If they can see it, they can hack it, even when it's running in hidden mode. Fewer rolls are better, especially for things like legwork. Just make, if you have to, boil it down to a couple of simple rolls, but track all of your successes for Overwatch unless the test involves resonance. If it's Detectomancer, resonance doesn't create Overwatch. So any other test, just track your successes, and even if you outroll your player, let them succeed if it isn't plot relevant. Convergence is enough of a threat that it doesn't behoove you to slow your game down by making them roll again and again and again for a rudimentary test. The convergence will catch up with them in time, whether they succeed or not. So don't slow your game down on legwork and the like. Focus on the main plot at hand. Number two, simplify the mechanics. Shadowrun, as we've discussed, is a crunchy system, and in some places, and as far as I'm concerned, the Matrix in particular, has more bulk than is necessarily required to incorporate the game in the Matrix in easily. So, a few things that I would suggest: ignore marks or tiers, depending on whether you're playing 5th or 6th edition. Trying to keep track of how many marks you've got on a system or what level of access you've got. A lot of that, knowing which action requires how many marks or what kind of clearance, it's a lot to juggle, a lot of extra work to make sure that you know all that stuff intrinsically. So my suggestion is use the structure of the host to represent the different levels of difficulty that are incorporated into a network. If you want to have, anything that would be like a number 2 mark or a number 3 mark, whether you want security, admin, so forth, have a host within a host, and that host, that sort of internal host, has a higher firewall, better ratings, etc. And I find just doing paring it down with a simple secondary hack roll to see if you can get into that higher level system is better than tracking marks and having to clear marks from the other system. And it's just less homework if you just structure your host a little better. There's a lot of things you can do in the Matrix, regardless of the edition you play. Each has its own die roll mechanic. Like there's 20 some odd Matrix actions, I believe. And each one of them has a different attribute and skill combination to pull off. Rather than bogging down a game worrying about, well, is this the right combination of skill and attribute, make a judgment call. 6th edition made this much easier by reducing the number of hacking skills from 9 down to 3. Best rule of thumb is if it's legal, use electronics. And if it's illegal, use cracking. And then if you're a technomancer, you have the tasking, which, okay, if you're a technomancer, you have access to that extra skill. 5th edition, because there's more skills and it's a little more in depth, my go-to skills are typically hacking for illegal actions, typically paired with logic, computer for legal actions, typically paired with intuition, and then electronic warfare kind of straddles the line. I usually pair it with logic if you're using jamming, but intuition if you are looking for a hidden device or trying to wiretap or something that you're more trying to go with your gut as to how to get through the encryption and so forth. But rather than getting lost in trying to figure out exactly what skill, what attribute, make a judgment call and move on. You don't want to get you don't want to be flipping through the Matrix section trying to find out exactly what the proper skill is when it could just be resolved quickly with a snap decision and a quick roll of the dice, and then you can move on and continue your story. Number 3, and probably my biggest one, host design is important. As I alluded to when I was talking about dropping the use of tiers and marks, you can circumvent a lot of problems as a GM with a little bit of pre-planning and setting up a host that will challenge your decker and not necessarily get bogged down in a bunch of rules as to how security reacts depending on how many marks it's got on the invading decker and so on and so forth. So one thing that probably my only point of praise for data trails in 5th edition was that the rules that they put together for designing a host, namely putting together the ASDF ratings and so forth, are actually a pretty solid guideline. You definitely want to pick a host rating that you feel is appropriate for the type of opposition you want to put together. You're going to want to decide which is the lowest and the highest of the ASDF ratings. Typically, I put sleaze as the lowest because if you're breaking into a host, it's often not trying to be subtle. So the highest ones will be one of the firewall will be one of the top 2, and then depending on whether or not it's a database or a more overt system, I will go either data processing or attack for the next rating. Any double-digit ratings you put on a host should be well deserved. You don't want to keep throwing rating 10, rating 11 hosts at your decker. It's going to demoralize them when they simply can't breach the firewall until they've got several Shadowruns under their belts, and how are they going to get there if they haven't had a few smaller systems to try and crack open in the process? It's unrealistic for a small, Yakuza brothel to have a rating 10 host. That one might have a rating 5 or a rating 6 host. And even then, if your player has the electronics or software skill, depending on your edition, give them the option of like introducing a virus in the system or something that will allow them to lower those ratings temporarily when they're going to go do their hack. It just allows for the Decker to have some control over their own destiny when they're breaking into a system, and it will make the impregnable digital fortress a little more it'll help the Decker player feel a little more clever in terms of being able to break into Fort Knox and get away with what they're after when a system is being touted as impregnable. So be careful when you plan your ratings. Err on the low side if you are questioning just how powerful a system should be. Like that, double-digit systems reserved for like the megas, and even then, like a top secret computer system. Beyond that, try to keep it a little lower so that people, so that your Decker has a chance to show off. If you're taking my suggestion in terms of dropping tiers and marks, put some thought into what might be contained within a nested host. Security systems will, they will obviously encompass whatever security measures are in the building that they're breaking into or what have you. And your cameras, your door locks, your motion sensors, any of those sorts of things, they'll all be kind of tucked away behind the security level firewall. Admin will be on a case-by-case basis. You're typically going to have your email server, your HR, that kind of thing sort of tucked away behind admin. And while that may not necessarily be needed for if you're doing a data steal, going into the admin side of things may not even be totally required. You may just simply need to shut down enough of security that you can get to where you need to go. And going into admin is none of your Decker's concern. That's fine. If you're breaking into a system so that you can add yourself to the payroll so you can get in with a valid set of credentials, that's going to require admin clearance. So determine just how much more powerful your security and admin systems are going to be within the system. And sometimes mix it up. Not in a normal system like environmental control, it would probably just be under the sort of the normal system umbrella. It's like, okay, you can turn the lights on and off. Well, we have flashlights, so who cares? But if you have a building where one of their main products is being grown in a hydroponics bay, being able to control the environment and make sure that it is kept at a nominal level, that might get locked under security. So, it could lead to some decisions on your runner's part where they're like, okay, well, we can go in and we can mess with this stuff. We don't need super high clearance. And then they find out it's locked behind a security wall. It can cause a momentary moment of panic when the Decker's like, oh crap, there's another firewall I got to cut through. You guys got to hold them off a little longer. If you're going to have a separate offline host that contains the MacGuffin they're after, it's like, okay, well, I don't want them to be able to get to this file when they're in the building lobby. I want to have them go into like a data vault, and I want them to get this. By all means, have a standalone system like that. However, if you're going to make them jump through those hoops to get to that server, make the MacGuffin easy to acquire. They've already been through hell, presumably, getting from the front door to wherever this server is, and they finally get there, and then they have to cut through wave after wave of ice. That's not going to do much for an already beleaguered team. Now, don't get me wrong. That file should probably be encrypted and or have a data bomb on it, because they're not going to want anyone walking off with their shiny new prototype designs. So, still take some precautions, but don't have it like a nested within a nested within a nested security. They've already gone through the entire mission. If they're going to an offline server, keep that offline server simple. And while you can have a decent firewall, try not to have them come all this way only for the decker's gear to get bricked. And ultimately the run's a failure after all that effort. You ultimately want your players to succeed. So make it a challenge, but don't make it a labyrinth. All right. Next thing you got to figure out is ice. Any system worth protecting is going to have ice on it. Patrol ice should be a constant thorn in the hacker's side, playing a game of cat and mouse as they move through the system. But knowing the order of activation of like what ice will be summoned first, second, third is important. An R&D system where they're developing the latest in weaponry or some dabbling in magics they shouldn't be. Black ice should be early in the queue. After all, you might have seen something you shouldn't have. Whereas a low-level system, black ice shouldn't even factor into it. The Maker Corps can get away with using black ice because they can enforce their own laws on their own lands. But if you're breaking into like a government host or some other like public works kind of thing, they can't afford the HR nightmare that would be having someone being rendered brain dead by your system. So, the Corp won't hesitate. Make sure your ice is scalable to what organization is running the system. By all means, common ones would be things like probably Sparky and Trace, just because it's like, okay, well, we can destroy the Decker's machine so that he can't do this anymore. And of course, if you run a Trace on him, well, you can catch the person and put them in jail. So those ones are going to be fairly common as sort of non-lethal options. Although if God catches up with your Decker, you might as well wish for black ice. But once you figured out your ASDF ratings, your ice, the overall construction of your host, at this point, you can have fun with it. Once all the nuts and bolts are put in place, what's the iconography like? Is it a Japanese corp? Does their host look like an old Shinto-style pagoda? Does the system sculptor have an obsession with Pablo Picasso? Or is the system well established, or was it just kind of thrown together at the last minute? Any of these things can change how the system is displayed. You're not going to want to go to this kind of effort in terms of describing how a system looks, unless it is probably plot relevant. If you're going to be spending a lot of time in this host trying to extract certain pieces of information and so forth, you're going to want to give the Decker a full-blown experience. But if you're breaking into a guard's comlink to extract today's password, you don't need to worry too much about the iconography of his comlink. You can just sort of say, okay, you break in, make the test to look for the passcode, decrypt it, and download it. And hopefully in that time you haven't been detected. But when you're wading through a host like that, take the time to add a splash of flavor and show what the Matrix can truly feel like to an end user. Like, use all five senses, use your knowledge of whatever culture your company comes from. Like, if you break into an Renraku system versus a Zeta Krupp system, they should feel completely different. Even if their ratings and their ice are all identical, it should feel like a different system. And that's where just developing the iconography and pick out, like, how do you want your ice to manifest? How do you want your icons to manifest? What's the overall backdrop of this? Just bring it to life. Once you've done all of this legwork and all this homework and you've developed this system over, you don't have to be too in depth. I usually spend about 2 paragraphs laying out the iconography, and then I just have a block of stats for the host. And it's often enough to When they log in, you know exactly what numbers to what dice you're rolling for a test, and when they're looking around, you know exactly how you want to describe it. That way, it moves quick, it's fluid, and you're not bogging things down or flipping through the books trying to figure out how all this is supposed to be rendered. At this point, you've already made those decisions, and you can just fire it off the cuff and keep the game moving. So hopefully, with those sort of 3 tips, although the third one was a little long, it'll help you pre-plan your matrix system so that you end up with something that you're happy with incorporating into your game, which doesn't detract from the overall time spent in the system. To a lesser degree, I've heard similar questions regarding the astral plane. I personally haven't really run into them, but there are ways that you can, try to keep the astral plane lean and mean. Like that. The astral plane is a world of life, colors, unseen perils, but only focus on those that are relevant to the player. You don't want to overwhelm your mage whenever time they go on and do astral perception or an astral projection and just describe everything around. Like, obviously, when they go into the astral plane, they are looking for something in particular. Focus on the details at hand. And of course, that's going to be throttled by the number of successes they get on a sensing test. If they don't have a sensing, they can't read auras, and just emphasize with your players just how important the sensing skill is, regardless of whether you're a spellcaster, a summoner, or an alchemist. If you can see the astral plane, you're going to want to take the sensing skill. Similar to putting together a host in the Matrix, know your magical security. Does the building have wards? Are there spirits actively patrolling? Are there spirits on call? Is there a mage on site? Those, like, having a mage on site should be fairly rare. After all, only 1% of the population has magic. So, naturally, they're not going to want to throw them out in the front lines. They're going to want to keep them back towards the corporate HQ, and when an alarm goes off at one of the facilities, they will probably summon a spirit and send the spirit out to investigate. So, often try to keep spiritual stats on hand, so that if the players trip an alarm and the company does have magical assets, have a spirit manifest. It'll immediately throw a wrench into the works, because if they're breaking into a company that, as far as they knew, had no magical support whatsoever, having an earth elemental appear in the middle of a hallway immediately throws them into a defensive posture. But like that, also when it comes to things like spirits, given that they have immunity to normal weapons and so forth, keep the force under control. You don't want to, as a first responder, you don't want to throw a Force 8 spirit at them. It's like, okay, well, this alarm's gone off before. This place has had some problems with people breaking in. We'll send like a Force 3. And we'll send us like a lower level spirit out there to investigate. And if that spirit shows up, says, hey, I think there's a problem, and then gets snuffed out, then send in the bigger guns. Of course, the risk is the bigger the spirit your security mages summon, the more drain they're going to take. So, if you decide to throw like a smaller force, and then they throw, it's like, okay, well, we'll send a Force 3 in. Okay, that went out. Okay, let's send a Force 6. They may not have enough left in them to send out another one if the Force 6 gets bested. There's going to be drain. The bigger the spirit, the more drain the mage is going to incur. So keep that in mind, so you don't just send like just a never-ending supply of like Force 6 spirits or Force 8 spirits, because it's not reasonable to think that a mage could keep that up indefinitely. The main things to focus on are spirits, mages, and wards. Even as someone, having a ward on site it should be an indication to your players that they do have access to magical security, even if there's none on site. It will probably only take not taking note of that once or twice before your players realize they need to look for wards. And then you can get into more elaborate ones, like if you're going to an R&D facility, throw in a trap ward or an alarm ward, just so that they look at it from the outside, say, nope, it's all clear. And then when they go in, they realize, oh, there was something. And now they're stuck inside the building as spirits and reinforcements are being dispatched. So, I like that. It's not as much of a time detractor as the Matrix, but there are ways you can slim down your astral resistance to make the game more interesting, but also not get lost in the details. In any case, I hope that these tips will help make your Matrix and your magic more accessible in your game and allows your players to have fun while keeping everyone engaged and not having people sitting at the table bored. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please let me know by hitting like, maybe even subscribing to this channel. I mean, I can't make you, but... I also maintain a blog where I post all of the run material I've written in the past, and will continue to do so as I run more material. If you'd like to review any of that old material, I'll put a link in the description, as well as a link to my website for Heroes for Hire, in case you would like me to run a game for your group, whether it be Shadowrun or any of the other RPG systems that I offer. Or, as with the shelf behind me, I have a large collection of board games that I am willing to bring to your door. Now, at this time, that I'm recording this, COVID-19 is still doing the rounds out there, and my in-person services are, shall we say, limited. But I do offer games online as needed. I hope I can run a game for you sometime soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and reach out to your friends. In this time of social distancing and quarantine, we need to remain connected and remind each other that we still support and love one another. Avoid reality, play more games.